Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. I will start by identifying certain global trends that will shape probably the future and in the international arena, and then try to focus on the European Union and Europe as a global actor. First, as a global trends, we have to identify that the future will be less multilateral, probably more bilateral, and more multipolar, meaning that there will be different poles with different spheres of influence, and they will be much more interdependent because of economic flows, because of human movements, because of very close commercial relations, but at the same time it will be a more fragmented world. It will be more fragmented because identity politics will have much more weight than they have today. And this will be set in a context called by my colleague Eduard Soler from Barcelona, a liquid alliance context, in which alliances between global actors will be shaped more by opportunity than by ideologies. This will emerge in a context in which demography is also a key element. We will have an aging population in Europe, while the MENA region will still be a youth region, a young region with a youthful population. We will have and still have increasing human movements with a rapid urbanization processes from the rural areas to the big cities, but also human movements not only fostered by conflicts or by natural disasters, but also by climate change effects. And we will have rising inequalities. For example, we will have a rising middle class in the southern Mediterranean, but we will have a losing middle class in Europe. And this will be directly linked with the emergence of something which is, for me, one of the more the more important game changers in the region, which is the individual empowerment and how this individual empowerment leads to a global citizenship. We have been seeing these last years how people have taken the streets and have the capacity to mobilize and even put into question the social contract. These street politics, sometimes through social movements, have been translated into political movements, and political movements that are very locally based. And we have seen it in the Mediterranean, in Barcelona, in Madrid, even in Beirut, how social movements which were engaged in social issues have turned into politics. This will be one of the main features of our future. Non-state actors that will have a strong weight in international politics, because nation-states in certain way are in crisis. Here in the Middle East, we have this post-colonial nation-state crisis, okay? But we have also questions over the nation-states, on nation-states in Europe. So, and particularly made by these sub-state identity groups. So we might see the rise of local powers and new actors as global players. What could be the role of the European Union in this context? Obviously, the European Union was created to avoid conflict between states, and it's not well prepared to avoid conflict between states and non-state actors. So it will have to think again how to deal with this risk. We have seen it now with Brexit, but also with the attempts of secession in Catalonia in Spain. We have also seen the collapse of values due to the mismanagement of the refugee arrival and the rise of populist, xenophobic groups in Europe. This is a weakness of Europe, and this is joined with the weakness that the European Union has in the MENA region. In a global context where there is increasingly a lack of leadership, Europe still has a complex relation with the region, a complex relation with authoritarianism. It is prone to buy stability at the expense of freedom, and it runs the risk of shaping its relations with the MENA region according to determined elements, like, for example, terrorism as the driver of cooperation. This is risky. It's risky because it could make European countries fall into the trap of instrumentalized agendas, but at the same time, it deals or it leads to short-term responses that have counterproductive effects in 10, 20 years' time. We have seen it with military interventions. So, at the same time, European societies have been heavily disrupted by the effects of terrorism. So they have to rethink how they manage and how they combat terrorism and how they relate with other actors in the combat of terrorism without risking certain values. Also, the passivity of the European Union in the region has brought about considerable risks, not only for the region, but also for the whole world. The humanitarian paradigm is at stake at this moment. I mean, humanitarian access to civilian victims in case of war should never be a negotiation card, should be a right, and it's turning into a negotiation card, and this will have effects for the whole world. We have increasing proxy wars in which Europe has no capacity to respond and in which Europe is trapped or even paralyzed. And it will have to address how to deal with the neighbors of its neighbors. So how to deal with, for example, Gulf states with which they still have little or inexistent relations. And they might even face such a state instability in the future. So we should concentrate on common challenges, because there are common challenges, not only terrorism and fighting terrorism, but also education. There is an incredible ignorance in the North and in Europe on the reality of Southern Mediterranean and MENA societies. And there is a need for knowledge transfer, Mr. Kalin mentioned before. There's a need to fight against environmental challenges. And there's the urgent need to respond to the needs and the demands of the young populations. So Europe needs to recover leadership and initiative inside the European Union as well, because its social cohesion is threatened. It has to rebuild trust in the European Union. When the nation state is questioned, we have to make people understand that, for example, the responsibility for not hosting refugees in Europe is not of European institutions, is of nation-state members that have not fulfilled their promises. Also, the European Union will have to get the initiative to reframe its migration and asylum policies. And particularly, it will have to deal with the issue of identity and accepting that the identity of Europe is not a single identity. In fact, we cannot treat European Muslims as an imported reality, because European Islam is an autochthonous reality. From 711 until now, we have had European Muslims. So we have to normalize diversity and accept political expressions, both in the North and in the South, that will come from this diversity. In fact, Europe will have to deal with the clash of an increased Muslim population from 6% to 8% in 10 years, but also with a more public Muslimness. And this is very important, because European Muslims need to have the opportunity to be vocal, to be at the center of public life, and not in exclusion, not in a marginal setting. It's not policing Muslims, it's giving Muslims a voice in European affairs. And as now is said in Barcelona, life means engaging. So we all should engage very actively in the fight against Islamophobic language, Islamophobic groups in Europe. This will show that we accept diversity, we accept hybridization, and at the end, we accept the fact that my neighbor in Barcelona is called Musa. He's a young economic graduate. He is a pious Muslim. He is a halal consumer. He is a voter of left political parties. He's against independence in Catalonia. He's a fan of Barça Football Club, and he's absolutely passionate of Star Wars. And this is the reality of Europe, and this is the reality that we have to fight to recognize, both socially but also politically. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much.